Good, yeah, thank you very much. Good evening. Sounds like a church meeting you've started here. I took a few notes here. I had a speech, Quint, that I was going to do, then you drove me around. I kind of started to get a feel for the place. And I'd left it in the car and decided I was going to do something different. And now as I'm standing here, I kind of wish I wouldn't have left it out there. I did want to make, I was just talking with a few of you outside, just a remark. It's very odd. You know, I live in Washington, and after 9/11, we did very close tracking of the attitudes. You know, what a horrible thing that was. We did it years before that also at Oklahoma City. They might be a little different than this, but they still had the same kind of devastating psychological effect. But on your point about leadership, a very odd thing as leaders you got to keep an eye on, and that is that people outside this area don't think you've been through anything. And you know, and I'm really sorry to say this, but I'm one of them. But when you come in on the airplane and you start driving around, you get a feel for it. It changes you medically. But I noticed in Oklahoma City, that horrible thing that happened there, there's a propinquity, or you know, the closer or the nearer that you are, the more problem that it was. Same thing in one of the things you won't read a lot about, but that 9/11 in New York City, remember it happened to us in Washington, D.C., but not as badly, but it didn't really happen on the West Coast. And so in San Francisco and Los Angeles, they didn't really feel that bombing. It was something that happened, especially Oklahoma City was something that happened, you know, sort of 10,000 miles away to a group of people we'll never know. But my heart goes out to you. I was looking around here. I know that you've been through a lot of devastation. As Quint so eloquently put, though, this is a time, you know, where your whole community will be looking to leadership, and it's a time where you got to jump up. And Randy, good job on saying let's meet anyway. But another good example is Rudy Giuliani, and I know the reporters here. I don't want to say that just so you didn't print this, but Rudy wasn't up to much before 9/11. And but it was that one moment, you know, where 20 million people looked around for a leader, and there he was with the bullhorn, and it changed him. But he was also the right person. But I would second what my pal Quint says. You really do. I mean, you got to jump up, and when you even on days when you don't feel like leading, and on days when you don't feel like it's easier to cancel something. I think you got to keep moving forward. The rest of the country may not be thinking about it, but boy, the whole state of Florida is. But thank you for having me here, Quint. It's good to see you, and good to be here. It's always tough to give a speech at night. I always feel like people are, you know, I feel like your first question is, how long is he going to talk? But I got to get something off my chest, by the way. And I don't come to Florida very much. Once you kind of get to Washington, I don't know what. But I was born and raised in Nebraska. That's what I wanted to tell you. And I went to school at the University of Nebraska. Every time I come to Florida, it gives me the willies, because Florida teams, Nebraska's been very good over the years. The Florida teams always beat my red team. And so when somebody's from Florida, they always make jokes, because we would do real well. You know, we'd win a championship here, there, but we really couldn't beat Miami or Florida State very well. But there's a joke that has just followed me and plagued me everywhere I go. But this Cornhusker is walking. I got to tell it to you. I'm not a joke teller, so this doesn't go well. But anyway, there's a Cornhusker walking on the beach. I don't know if it's somewhere in Florida or where it is. And he looks down, he picks up a bottle, he takes the cork off. Maybe you probably all have heard this and tell it yourselves. Anyway, a genie appears. Genie comes out and looks at him and says, "You know the deal, you get a wish." And he goes, "Oh my gosh, this is the most unbelievable thing. I get a wish. I don't know what to do." And he goes, "Hey, you know what?" He goes, "I'm going to make the biggest wish. I'm just going to fix the world." So this Cornhusker guy pulls out a map and gets on the ground, get on the sand. The genie gets down there, and he says, Genie says, "What are we going to do here?" And he goes, "Well, there's problems all over the world." He goes, "Let me go over this with you. Right here is the Sudan, millions of people, genocide, and here's North Korea, and here's what's happening in Iraq, and he went, and the country's divided, and he went through all of this stuff. He went all the way around the world in a real competent, comprehensive way, and he said, I want my wish to be peace throughout all these things." Genie said to him, "Oh my gosh, I've been in this bottle for like 10,000 years. I'm a pretty good genie, but I can't do that one. I can't just wave my hand and have peace created throughout all those places. You got to make another wish." So the guy says, he says, "I'm a Cornhusker." And he says, "We play through our whole season, and then at the very end of the year, we play either Miami or Florida State, and they ruin our year. So I guess all I'm going to ask is that when we go through the season, that you let the Huskers win." Genie thinks and he says, "Let me see that map again." Another thing is that when you're from Nebraska on the East Coast, everybody thinks you're stupid. And I'm kind of punchy. He and I were started in the East Coast and came down. But so sometimes if I'm with our people from Princeton or Harvard or Yale or wherever, they make fun of me for being from Nebraska. And I just hope that doesn't get back to Nebraska. But anyway, we were playing a team that was nationally televised on ABC. We were all wound up for it. This is kind of a famous moment in Nebraska history. And an ABC reporter was interviewing this running back. I'm not going to tell you too much about him, or you'll know who he was. He's very, very good. Anyway, she asked him a sensitive, feel-good question. Why do you ask a running back something like that? But anyway, if you know Nebraska's helmets, they're white, and they just have a very simple red N on the side. So she asked this running back the sensitive question, puts a mic out, and she says, "Mike, if the N on your helmet didn't stand for Nebraska, what might it stand for?" This guy thinks for a while, kind of threw him off, and he says, "I'd have to say knowledge." Well, it's tough being a Nebraskan in Florida, but let me make a couple remarks, and maybe you'll have a couple of questions. I'm going to kind of cut to the chase on what I think are the sort of the biggest discoveries or breakthroughs that we had with this massive amount of data. First of all, you got to think like a pollster. And I've been CEO here for 16 years. I've had sort of the same job for 25 years. But when you see so many polls, I mean, your eyes just glaze over. But more than that, when you watch the news and you watch politicians, and when I'm at conferences in D.C., you look at people and you just say to yourself, everything they're saying is not true. I'll give you an example. Right after 9/11, George Bush came on TV, and he said, "This has been horrible. So all we're doing is hunting killers. So calm down. We're fine with the Arab world. We're fine with Muslims." So there it was. Colin Powell, I have a lot of respect for Colin. He's a good client of Gallup's, a good friend of ours. He got up and said, "Here's the deal. We're going to hunt. We're going to track down killers. They're called Al-Qaeda, maybe Egyptian Jihad, maybe Islamic Jihad, but anyway, we're going to get these guys. But rest assured, we're fine with the rest of the world." So then, anyway, they called around to, Egypt, Hosni Mubarak, and the Fads and Sads in Saudi Arabia. They went, "Oh, everything's fine. We'll help you get those guys." But remember, that's the news that we got. So we all went about saying, "Okay, everything's fine." We very quickly fielded a poll in 9 Muslim countries. And we got most of them. Right then, you couldn't do Iraq, but we got Iran and Saudi Arabia and the obvious ones. So we asked them a lot of questions. Came back that depends on the country, between 20 to 40% of them think it's a good idea to kill Americans. Not just have bad, but to kill Americans. 20 to 40% of them think that's a good idea. So that's frightening to you. Frightening to me. Do you know what was more frightening to me? How come our leadership didn't know that? I'm not a liberal. How come they didn't know that? But you know what? The Democrats didn't know that either. No leader of the West world knew that. The other thing that bothers me is that in universities all around the world, those kids in political science, whatever they're up to, they're trying to figure out about peace. There's only 6 billion people on this earth. 1.2 billion of them are Muslims, and we didn't know they hated us. How could you be that wrong? Well, one of the things is that when you are a leader, you have to have the courage to just look at a situation and say, everything I've learned, everything that people have told me and I respect, just might be wrong. But unless you can think that way, it's very hard to make discoveries about world peace, about how to make my city better, how to make my family better, how to change my own life, whatever it might be. I'll give you another one. This one's a very odd one. But one of the surveys that we track on a long-term basis is just public schools. So how do you think the American public schools are doing? Horrible, right? They're just terrible. So when we ask the American public, how are you doing with American schools? How are we doing with American? They give it low ratings. As a matter of fact, we've been tracking it for 30 years, and right now they get the lowest ratings they've ever had in 30 years for the American public. So there you have it, right? And when you look at, and when you watch CNN or Fox or ABC or the Today Show or anything else, when there's a story about public schools, you can see it because it's all bad. So there you have it. You ever notice it? It almost seems to me like, you know, Littleton. How long ago did that happen? I can find something on Littleton every week. But if you go through and take, out of the 100 million families, just those that have kids in public schools, and you say to them, where's your child go to public school? So if they say they go to Lincoln High, they go to Washington High, whatever it is. We say, how is school right there? That score is the highest it's been in 30 years. It's right at about 74%. And that's the real customer, do you see? So one is an image. So leadership has screwed up that image of public schools, but the truth is the performance is the highest it's ever been. And I know about Cincinnati and I know about Chicago and all of that. I'm talking about the quality of service that we provide for 100 million households. And it's the highest it's ever been. Well, I took this over. I had a meeting with the Secretary of Education. We were just kind of warming up before we started. And I pulled a piece of paper out and I said, have you seen this? He looks at it, sees the 30-year graph. He's a smart guy, can read a graph real fast. And he says, does this say what I think it says? So, yeah. I said, it's the best. I said, we track customer satisfaction for everybody, Walmart and Ritz-Carlton, everybody alike. Hospitals, like Clint said. Public schools get one of the highest scores of all of these great organizations. So anyway, the secretary, he's got all his, you know, to be in Washington, you got to have a lot of staff that you got to slap him around too. You're not really important. But anyway, he looked at that, and anyway, he snaps at his staff and he says, "How come we don't know this?" You know what I'm thinking? You're Secretary of Education. How come you don't know it? But you know what happens when you have your premise wrong? All of the strategies and planning that you build going forward for your engineers is like the Bernoulli effect. It makes things worse unless you have those premises right. My daughter goes up the road from me to Penn State, and ever since she's only been this big, Quint, she was going to be a teacher. She set her room up when she was 3, had the chairs and all that. She practiced. She did all that until she got to Penn State. Anyway, she comes home from break and she says, I'm changing my major. I said, good Lord. I said, your whole life you've been planning that. How come you're doing that? She said, because teaching's for losers. But see, there you have it. When you mismanage a great American institution, and it's not just this. I mean, it's been mismanaged. The image has been mismanaged for 20 years. What's the outcome? But how many people in other schools, just like my daughter Jackie, but you see, if it would have been the other way, and they would have said, this is the best we've ever been, it changes everything. Somebody should know that. I had one. I'll just do one more with you. But I was at church, Quint, and my my minister, I'm a Methodist, so I go to church to have these motivation speeches. I take my list along and I work on my list, and I get adrenaline rushes. I mean, this guy's really good. His name's Cecil. I can't wait for his thing. But you know, I'm a Methodist and he's a Methodist minister, so he gives me kind of a motivational speech. I mean, it's light and it's great. Anyway, while I'm sitting there, he just blows the love of Jesus into me, just like this. And I never had that. I never had him do that before. And he was, you know, saying I got to walk in the shadow of Jesus and everything else. So I went up afterwards to him and I said, Cecil, so what was today? I said, you were beating the love of Jesus into me. And he went, oh my gosh, Jim, I'm sorry. He said, I'm so sorry. He says, but the district guy came around. and he said to get my money up, we got to get everybody lockstep with Jesus. And he says, how do you think it worked? And I said, I don't know. I said, fine with me, but it might scare some of these other people because it's a pretty big change. Well, anyway, we got a whole bunch of ministers together and tried to crack the code on that. And the only thing we were trying to figure out was, how do you get more money? So if your church has $2 million or $4 million, how might you increase it by 20 or 30%? But the whole answer was, beating the love of Jesus into the congregation is the right thing to do. You want to do that. If there's whoever ministers or Christian minister in here do, or any denomination, but you have to get engagement first, or it gets lower. So you see, it's an algorithm. It's algorithmic. You got to have the right steps. So what that means is, let's say that Randy, where we are, has a gambling problem. You don't, do you, Randy? Because they chuckled a lot. And Quint, he's into baseball, so he'll run our church softball team. But if you get him engaged first of all, and then beat the love of Jesus into him, then you get a big increase in your pay. But if you do it the other way, you're slowly destroying your church. I wondered about that because if you go to giving's lower than and Methodists are a pretty big part of it, but giving is the lowest it's ever been. Took a group of successful marriage compared to horrible marriages. What you do is you just have an experimental group, a control group, and then you ask them a whole bunch of questions, do some factor analysis, whatever kind of modeling you like, and you figure out what are the attributes of a successful marriage compared to a horrible marriage. And you just try everything that you possibly can. Do you have any idea what's the single thing that's most likely to predict a successful marriage? Hand-holding. Hand-holding. What else? You got another one? What'd you say? Huh? Money, he said. I thought that would be pretty good. Anything else? What? Communication? Religion. You guys have all, you're not, the main one, nobody's close to. You want, huh? Sex. Boy, the women always sex. No, What's that? I didn't hear what he said. Friendship, what? Quality time, respect. Now remember, it's the only thing. So if you had to bet $1,000 on a marriage, it's just the one attribute or correlate that's most likely to... Football? Yes, it is. It's football. No. He said love. You'd think that'd be a good one, but no. Oddly enough, parents, he says. No. Oddly enough, the single best correlate to predicting marriage is how long you dated. And the longer you dated, the more likely you are to have, very simple. But there's like no marriage counselor in the world that teaches that particular point. Now listen, here's the other one. Somebody said religion. Was that you, sir? He said, the other one that's kind of odd is, I don't know what, but Also, the number of times you go to church was the second best correlate. But if somebody came to you and said, I want to have a successful marriage, there are two attributes that you can advise them on, and that is, make sure you've dated a long time so you know them. And the other one is, go to church together, and whatever that, and there's no reasoning behind it. Those are just the two best correlates. By the way, somebody said, living together predicts divorce. So there's also a negative correlate. One of my favorite ones in all that was counseling. So one of the questions, I'm sorry for the counselors in here, but one of the questions was, have you had problems in your marriage? They went, yeah. And we said, so to that group, we put them over here and we said, have you ever had any counseling? Yeah. Did the counseling make your marriage a little better or a little worse? What do you think they said? Yeah, they said worse. So that's the other things you can do when somebody say, date them a long time, go to church, don't live together, and if you have problems, try to work it out. try to work it out yourself. The number one thing I think that if sometimes people will say to me, of all these polls you watch, what's the single biggest change you've seen in the social fabric of Americans? There's one real big one that y'all need to know. And that is that Dr. Gallup died, Quint, in 1984, but he was a super sociologist. Everybody around the world knew him, and everybody had to check in with him, but he would write questions that we continue to track. But what's the great American dream was one of them, and what it used to be was to have a family and to have in peace. And that was it. I just kind of followed all the way through for, I would say, at least half a century, about 50 years. The big change that happened recently is that now when you ask Americans, what's the great American dream, it's changed. And what do you think it is? Do you know? He said retirement. You sound like a Frenchman. Owning your own home. What do you think it is now? What? That's close enough. It's just job. So if there's somebody walking around and you want to read their mind, chances are they're thinking about their job. And that's now how Americans, but it's not true with other countries, especially with France, with Germany. But people define themselves and their relationship with the world through their job. But that means that as leaders, remember, it's not very long ago, if you'd have been in my town, D.C., or where we just were in New York, men all had the same looking hats, they had cigarettes, and they were salary men, weren't they? And they just kind of went in and did their work, shuffled their papers and all that. That's not really having a job. Now people define their value, they define who they are by their job. So anytime you're looking at a group of people and you think, what can I do for them? I know it's not true 100% of the time, but most of the time, as American leaders, we have to change how we address all groups of people because the single most important thing in their life is the job. I'll give you a quick example. This is years later, but people used to just say to me, why did we ever elect Bill Clinton? I mean, he's been a pretty good president. Again, I'm right in the middle of the road on most things, but people used to ask that a lot because it was a big surprise that he won when he beat first George Bush. Remember, it took Ross Perot to help a little bit there. But we would ask this question, who are you going to vote for? Are you going to vote for George Bush or are you going to vote for Bill Clinton? And they said Bill Clinton. And that surprised us. So then we would rotate in other people. So we rotated in Norman Schwarzkopf. We rotated in Colin Powell. People didn't even really know who he was back then. He hadn't quite gotten famous. But both times they would say, I'll vote for Norman Schwarzkopf, Colin Powell, whoever he is, I don't know who that is, but I'll take him. But what it told us, with all due respect to President Clinton, nobody was voting for him at all. They were just voting against George Bush. So we went through attributes. So we would say, no, wait a minute, you're voting for Bill Clinton. We would say, do you think Bill Clinton, do you think George Bush is honest and trustworthy? Remember, this is old George Bush. Even Democrats go, yeah, we think he is. Do you think he has strong family values? Yeah, I think he does. Think he can handle international events and da-da-da-da-da? Yeah, I think he does. Do you think he cares about you as an individual? Some kind of a soft question like that. Then everybody said no. They went to Bill Clinton. Do you think he's honest and trustworthy? Well, God is my witness. This is even before all that other stuff. The public has a bullseye perception, but they said no. Said no. Do you think he's honest, trustworthy? No. Do you think he has strong family values? No. Do you think he can handle international things? No. Think he cares about you as an individual? Yes. I feel your pain. That was very good. But see, that changed an election. But James Carville was close, but it wasn't quite right when he said what? It's the economy, stupid. It wasn't. It was my job, stupid. Because unemployment had gotten that high, so you say, well, it was only up around, I don't know what it was, 7 and some tenths %. But when, excuse me, when we ask this question, are you out of a job, somebody in your family out of a job, or somebody you, I don't know, a friend or somebody you love out of a job? That went to 51%. So as soon as that happens, that's what takes you out. The Gallup poll is a division of Gallup, and although that's obviously somehow that reports to me, they don't let me in there. So I knock on the door, I go, let me in there, and they don't let me in. But because somebody said I hear on NPR. No, those are the other guys on NPR. Nobody lets me on NPR. But I think that when it comes right down to it in this election, you'll think it's war, and I saw war go up after the big Republican pep rally. Gallup had President Bush go clear up by 15 points, something like that. If you look at right then, he said, do you think the war is justified? The war went clear up, and then it came clear back down again. So I think there will be moments where it goes up and down. But if you're watching those battleground states, keep an eye on jobs. And so as those go up a little bit, and again, nothing against the president and nothing positive about Kerry, Americans just switch the chief when there are job problems. Well, when we looked at cities, it's very difficult to do. Let me just give you a couple of points. So now you're supposed to be thinking like they should be thinking like laboratory people. But clear your head and think about what you might do to build a great city. It doesn't matter if you start with Pensacola. It doesn't matter if you take San Francisco or Minneapolis or Wichita or wherever it is. But you got to get this exactly right. Here's your assignment. There's only 3 metrics to watch. One is GNP, and you got to have GNP growth. It's a little tricky, but you have to have that one. The reason it's a little bit tricky is, remember, if you just want your GNP to go up real fast, I can just move in slaughterhouses. I can just move in factories that build boxcars, and I'll knock your GNP up. But here's the second of the 3 to watch, and that is just per job pay. And I never point at the mayor. I don't point at the Chamber of Commerce. But it's a leadership job that I think everybody has to be a part of. But per job pay, so whatever it is, so if it's $21,000, if it's $33,000, when your leadership is strong, that number will go up. And by the way, you can get all this stuff with census data. So you can go through and you can check very closely Pensacola, and you can compare it all over the country with per job pay. But if somebody said you had to either you were going to buy stock in a city, the ones that have real leadership energy, I think the single best thing is just per job growth. I'm going to give you the third and last one. Remember, there's a whole lot of them. Unemployment. I don't watch unemployment. The other one is just brain drain. You have to be real careful with that one. Who are you after? I'll tell you, the bird that you're hunting is exactly 25 to 35-year-olds that are single and college educated or have a graduate degree. That's the class of people that the whole country's going for, and they're migrating all over the country. Your job is somehow they've got to migrate here or your city doesn't have a future. The whole future lies within that particular group of people. Again, you can go to the Census Bureau. I wrote this one down. And here in Pensacola, in the last year, we had 2,714. So when you hear brain drain, that's what you need to focus on. When you hear brain drain, we had 2,714 of those exactly the exact right group. And then we had 2,779 go out. So you see you had a net, not a lot, but you had a net negative of probably 15 or 20%. So that's not a good score. I think that you probably, we all read about the same stuff, but you know about the Great Divide and the Great Sort that's going on? And so the migration patterns of these people are headed all over the country. Now, they're walking out of the Midwest. They're moving out of the Midwest slowly, and they're just running out of the Northeast. And most all of them are headed, which way? Do you want to guess? Yeah, that's right. South and west. But especially west, sir. Especially west. And so now there are cities, of course, Atlanta that does a real good job. But to put a focus on those people is almost everything. And I'll tell you why, just to really speed this up. It's very difficult to run a city like y'all do here. Do you know why? You know what's frustrating about it? That's why you can't blame it on the mayor. Because when you or any other politicians or city council, the problem is if you're in a business, and so when Quentin and I go in and help a business, when we turn the wheel, we can turn that business pretty quickly. So we can maybe get them profitable. If it's a retail store, you can turn them as fast as even 3 months. A company, you can turn it in a year, maybe 2 years. That's not too bad. The problem in steering a city is all the decisions that you make right now, the premises that you make, the examples I was giving you before, they have to be right, because when you turn the wheel, the ship doesn't turn for 10 to 20 years later. That's why what you do has to be, exactly right. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to find 4 types of people. So other people come in and tell you, planners, you got to have roads like this, they got to have access here, you got to have a city downtown, and you got to have this, so the creative class will go over here, and da-da-da-da-da-da. You're hunting 4 kinds of people, and what they are, and so this is what happens in making any town, whether it's Paris, Shanghai, or the future of Pensacola. One are entrepreneurs, the other one are inventors, or you can say innovators. The other one are super mentors, and the other one are role models. You can get pictures of those pretty easily. Entrepreneurs are people that start businesses. They create energy where none was before. Or they come in and they take over. Quint's obviously an enterpriser. No energy at all, something starts, and then there are people that have jobs. Now also, there's a continuum on that. This is high technology, this is low technology. The whole country has to go to high technology. So whether you're for or against jobs going out of this country, fight it as long as you want. They're going out. That's why this country, education and all that, when you hear politicians talk about it, it is the answer. We all have to go up. Not just with small cities or big cities, but our whole country. The second one, though, is you do want people who are scientists. You have to have some kind of laboratories here, because those are, a real easy one is Bill Gates. Real easy one is are the people at Intel. But they invent something that interrupts all the other technology, and boom, a big business starts. Austin's a great example. Michael Dell invented something in his apartment at college, and boom, it took off. I don't think cities ever work very well unless they have strong universities. And I don't think that you don't have to have MIT here, but whatever universities are, you have to support them, because they'll spawn those innovators and entrepreneurs. Here's one to watch for. The other one, this one is super mentors. By the way, sometimes they're bankers. I don't like bankers myself. Sorry, bankers, but if you've ever been through acquisitions or anything, they're like calling Tony Soprano most of the time. But the other one is super mentors. Sometimes they're bankers, sometimes they're venture capitalists, sometimes they're great teachers, sometimes they're ministers. But there are people that when young people come through their doors, for whatever reason, they just get about 3 times bigger than they ever were before. But super mentors are very, very valuable for your city. The last one is role models. Role models are anybody that does their job at a genius level, which would mean like they're better than 100,000 other people. And it could be a baseball player. Michael Jordan actually lived in my apartment for a while at Washington. I couldn't believe the stir he made. Filled the MCI Center and articles everywhere and shirts. But Michael's not an innovator. Michael's role model. But you have a lot of role models around. I think I went through and tried to code the 300 biggest leaders of the last 100 years. Mother Teresa and that sort of thing. Mother Teresa is probably a role model of all the things that she did, but probably first of all role model. Sometimes she'll overlap a little bit into the other area. But so let me summarize this, and then maybe you'll have a few questions. But at the very end of the day, you'll go through a whole bunch of structural things. You're going to have consultants come in, they'll give you a lot of structural things. You need all those. But they're not the thing that gets you ready for the 20-year growth. The 20-year growth, when you sort all of this out, is you got to have talent. And so when you see talent leaving, that's your 20-year future leaving. You say, well, a good question would be, how do we keep them? The answer to that is somebody needs to have 3 relationships. They need to have 3 relationships with leader people. If they have 3 relationships, they won't leave. 90% of the time, they just won't leave. So when you have a star scientist in this town, if they have 3 important relationships, they won't leave. And that's the job of everybody in the room, I think, when you see them, to figure out who's going to be in charge of those relationships. If you're ever just going to have a project at the Chamber of Commerce or the City Council, you ought to sit and write down who are those stars and try to keep them. Now remember, then you got 2 kinds of companies in town. I'm just going to review that for you. If you have one I call a trader company, and that's T-R-A-D-E-R. That's somebody that builds new movie theaters. Great, build those new movie theaters. No new money came in, though. Remember, they're just spinning the same dollars around and around. Somebody builds a new grocery store. That's great. But keep in mind that those types of businesses need a host, and the host is the population. So always segment these 2. They need to have somebody that cares about them, loves them, and have some sort of relationship with them. But the other one is more valuable, and you better keep your eyes peeled on them. I call them your guests. And your guests are companies that there's just no reason at all they need to be here. And almost all companies could do better if they moved to New York, Washington, Los Angeles, or San Francisco, or London, or Paris, because they're bigger, better markets. And so those tend to be high-tech companies that are in your city. But you have to have some kind of a strategy. So when you look at that and you say, there's some kind of a laboratory that somebody's making over their technology, you better have at least 3 relationships with them. You better give them awards. You better make them real important people, because they are just like hotel guests. They don't have to be here at all. They don't have to be here at all. Those are the 2 real important groups that you need to manage. So if you said, how do I build a great city? My answer would be, is you build a great city one business at a time. I'm obviously a capitalist. You've got to have public schools. There's a whole bunch of domains. Every one of those things has to be managed perfectly. People have to keep raising them. The other thing, though, is that if you said, okay, how do I build a great city? I can build it one company at a time. How do I build a company? It's something that all the leadership in this room has to work on. You build a great company one job at a time, because that's the new American dream. It means a lot that you asked me down here, and my heart goes out to all of you. You look great. You look strong, and you sound positive, and you sound resilient. But God bless you all, and thanks for having me here.